Hey guys, hello everyone, Sergey with you. This is the YouTube channel Assistance TV. In the last video, we put together a nice fishing rod. I explained how to assemble it correctly, what kind of line to use, how to choose the tip, and what type of ice fishing rod to get. It's meant to help you avoid mistakes on your first fishing trip. Today we're going to talk about jigs. I'll tell you about the different types of jigs, what baited and unbaited jigs are, and how to tie them properly. So that's it. It's also worth highlighting. So guys, let's get started. Today you can find a huge variety of jigs on the market. They come in different colors and shapes. Baited jigs, unbaited jigs, Ural jigs, circles, bulbs, and so on, guys. But there are jigs, baited, unbaited, tungsten, and lead. So let's first talk about lead and tungsten jigs. What are the differences? First of all, guys, they differ in price. A tungsten jig costs much more than a lead one. Why is that? Tungsten is a much denser metal than lead. It has more density and at the same time size. Both tungsten and lead jigs have weight as their main feature. The tungsten jig will indeed be heavier. So guys, the denser the metal, the more weight it has at the same volume. That's clear. What else do I want to say? Tungsten itself is more expensive than lead. That's one thing. And making a tungsten jig is more expensive than making a lead one. It requires more equipment and other expenses, another type of solder. So that's everything you need to know. That's the price and the fact that a tungsten jig at the same size as a lead one will have a greater weight. So if you want the smallest, lightest jig, the lead one will be, well, roughly the size of my fist. With a jig, the tungsten one will be half the size. That's really great because when fish are active in winter, they need very small jigs. Sometimes you need to use them when the fish just doesn't want to bite at all, and you can't make lead jigs that small, but you can with tungsten. Next, what you need to know, there are jigs, regular ones, meaning baited jigs, and there are unbaited jigs. What's the difference between them? A baited jig usually doesn't use any additional elements, so it's just some kind of drop or a little circle, and then there's a hook. And unbaited jigs have some kind of beads, some kind of cube. There are colors. They have a completely different approach, or they add a few beads, glitter, some. So here, guys, the approach to winter fishing is completely different. If with baited jigs, we attach a couple of maggots and drop them to the bottom, and that's it. When we catch fish, we don't attach any bloodworms to the jig without a bait. We just take the jig and we create some movements. As a rule, unbaited jigs are made in the shape of little bugs or worms resembling what fish feed on underwater. So you just take the jig, tie it on without any maggot at all. Unbaited, unhooked, that's what they're called, and it's all about a specific technique. That's it, guys, it's all done and the fish are caught. But I want to tell you, for beginners, I definitely don't recommend it. Unbaited jigs, it's better to use regular jigs. Maggot jigs, well, baited ones. Why is that? Because every fish and each fish bites on a specific type of play. It's very difficult to catch with baitless jigs. Even for me, guys, I honestly say it's difficult to get it right. Here, fish can have a bad beak, sometimes an average beak, and they rarely get caught with a good beak, and therefore it is quite difficult to catch fish without bloodworms. You need to give a specific jig, the kind of play that resembles something. If it resembles some kind of bait, you need to know how that bait moves underwater and makes smooth lifts. If this, for a baitless jig for perch, you just need something like this. So frequent vibrations and a smooth lift. If the jig is for roach, the roach just slowly rises with smooth, gentle rocking motions. Again, I say it's difficult, I don't recommend it. It's best to use a regular jig with bait if you're a beginner angler. Right now I've prepared a few jigs for a clear demonstration. The top row is baitless jigs. In my opinion, the bottom row of jigs are the ones that definitely need to be used with bait. Usually baitless jigs catch fish without bait, but some anglers still put a few maggots on them or just one maggot for better effectiveness. Guys, here's a bright example of a jig called cat's eye for perch because it has this little, how should I put it, ball. See, yes, the ball looks like an eye, bead, ball, and some kind of sleeve. This is how this jig is made. This jig, guys, is 100% baitless. The second jig is a little jig that just has a sleeve and it has a little bead. Now I'll show it to you. Here it is. So this is how it looks. So if you fish and create movement underwater, so this little bead of ours, it will just swim back and forth, thereby also attracting our fish. This is what the second jig looks like. The third jig is a fluorescent jig that even glows underwater. As I told you, there are a huge number of jigs today. The edge at the top is fluorescent and it glows. It has a red tip. You can use it just like a baitless jig as well as a baited one. So there are jigs that are clearly defined. Like this one, it's 100% for baitless fishing. And there are jigs that are 50-50. You can fish with bait as well, with bait and without. So these were them. These jigs, guys, are definitely fished with baited maggots. You see, these are regular jigs, like this faceted one. You could say it's some kind of spherical conical shape, like a dome, made to look like a larva, a maggot, or an ant, just some kind of droplet. But this one, to be precise, is an ant-like jig. I want to tell you from myself that I am great at this type of jig. I catch white fish, and in particular perch, using a few maggots as bait. That's why I also recommend that you start with simple jigs like these, with baited maggots. In general, there are a huge number of jigs today, and it's hard to understand which is which. Even experienced sport fishermen can sometimes get confused what the manufacturer did. So guys, choose what you like, or perhaps prefer something a little bit more natural. What might be underwater, some kind of larva, a little bug, or just a small droplet. I hope everything I just told you was clear. Now, the most important part, how to tie jigs. There are a few different types. Some look like this, some look like that, and then there are those, and they all knit quite simply. They just have a different eye at the top. Either it just sticks out like an ordinary fishing hook, or it has a cambric to prevent the fishing line from fraying, or simply a hole in the jig, and that's it. Let's start with this classic jig that has this kind of eye. How is it tied? We take the line. I specifically chose a thick one and thread it through the eye. The line always, guys, is threaded through from the side of the hook with the free end. So we take the end and hold it like this carefully and gently with our thumb and index finger. And now we need to work with this free end back to 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. It turns out that we just twisted it like this. And here we have a little loop left, you see? And we thread this free end through that little loop. Oh wow. Now we tighten all of this up, but we don't just tighten it dry. We take it and moisten it either with water or, as all fishermen do, with saliva. What is this for? Now we're going to tighten it up, show you all. We pull the two ends tight and we do it carefully. What is this for? This is all necessary because when we tighten the line, it heats up, and to prevent it from weakening at that spot and to keep it tight, we need to moisten it. So our knot is just like this, and we have a free end sticking out. You can just take a bite and leave it, but I don't know. I left a lot. I left it. In general, you should leave about 2 millimeters. And here you have this little knot, the simplest knot you can tie, guys, for a jig. I tie fishing hooks in the same way. The second type of jig is a jig with a hole. It just gets pushed in from the top with the hole facing up. We've got the jigs ready. Wow, just as that. And we pull it down. Down here we do everything exactly the same way. We just create a loop like this one. We'll have to hold this little loop with our fingers. Right here precisely, and around the shank itself. Just wind it up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many turns does each person make? If the line is thin, you can make 7 turns. If it is thick, maybe 5. Hold it with the other hand and the free end. Also, guys, we thread it through this loop. Thread it through, and now we tighten it. we tighten it on one side and also tighten it on the other side, holding our knot in place. Also make sure to wet everything well. We've tightened it well. And now we have a knot here just like the first time. But again, we just take this end, the one that's at the tip of the finger, and we simply bite it off. The next jig is this type of jig with heat shrink tube inside. The heat shrink tube is needed so that the line doesn't wear down against the base of the jig. If the previous jig didn't have a heat shrink tube, this one does. This jig is tied exactly the same way as the previous one, but the line is threaded from top to bottom through this heat shrink tube. So guys, that's basically the whole difference. Here is a jig like this at the top. So we tie the line to the ring. And jigs of this type also have cambrics, with the help of which the line does not fray so much. Guys, for those who didn't understand anything at all, I'll show you using a thick line and a ring. Let's imagine that this ring is our jig. We thread our line through there, and here it is. We hold it with our hands and just make some turns. 4, 5. I don't know, I'm telling you. 5, 6, 7, just make the turns. Now, we just need to tuck the free end in, right here, back into this loop. We tuck it in and slowly. We tighten this whole thing up. When we tighten it, we end up with this little thing here. See? Rings and a very reliable knot, a slip knot. That holds everything together, guys. I think you understood how to properly tie a jig, what the difference is between a maggot jig, a non-maggot jig, tungsten, zinc, and so on. So if you liked everything, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I'm going to tie a few more jigs now and get ready for tomorrow's fishing trip.